Let's see what Peter Hitchens makes of it all. Peter, a very good morning to you. Welcome. Slightly later than advertised.
Morning. Well, it's one of those speeches where you apply Roy Jenkins's old law. Almost all the phrases that she said, could she possibly, conceivably have said the opposite? If not, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And I think it was mostly what we doctors call boilerplate, I think.
Well, I mean, given the circumstances surrounding the speech, I think
quite grateful to Greenpeace for interrupting her.
Yes, I think that's a very good point.
A bit of drama it would otherwise have lacked.
Yes, I think so. But, I mean, given the week that she's had, I suppose her people will say, I think that was okay. I think that was a step in the right direction.
Well, she didn't fall off the tightrope. And that, of course, her enemies would have been hoping profoundly that she would, or that the backdrop would fall down, or she'd get a coughing fit, a la Theresa May.
Yeah.
None of those things happened, so she survived. The Tory party is left with a problem of a leader who seems to have lost a great deal of authority in a very short period of time.
Yes. I mean, I suppose the optics looked better than we were told they would be. There were more people in the hall. There was quite a lot of standing ovations. We were told that it was going to be empty because of the train strikes. We were told that there's a lot of cabinet sort of rebellion going on. I mean, it didn't look like that. I mean, I know that these things aren't easy to judge just by looking, but, you know, it was a sort of united front out there.
Yes, they put together a united front, but what else can they do? A party which has just got rid of its leader and replaced it with a new one can't realistically do the same thing again without looking completely ridiculous. And although there must be many misgivings about this new leader and this new cabinet, what would be the point of expressing them at the conference, which is supposed to be, as it were, the jumping off point for the campaigning and governing of the next year? It wouldn't make sense for them to do that. Also, we know how fantastically stage managed these things are. Anybody who's been to them knows that. So it's not impossible to make it look reasonably unified, but does it really represent the truth about the Tory party?
Well, the Tory party, before that speech, was in an awful lot of trouble, is what I would say. And it would seem that it had almost taken itself to a point of no return. But the reality is that there's no reason to have an election. There's no reason why any Tory backbencher would force another leadership battle. And so we are where we are, and I assume that she will stay now for a period of time. The market seems to have calmed down a bit. Everything seems to have gone sort of back to normal.
Well, who knows? Events can easily upset any kind of complacency. I don't know. I don't know why people invest so much in these speeches. I have to say I felt a great surge of relief when it came out earlier this morning. It was going to be short.
Yes.
I thought, how wonderful. But even so, I found myself, my mind wandering from time to time during it. I don't know whether a speech can solve the problem. But if you have an unsolved problem where you've had an actual conference where cabinet ministers have openly, publicly disagreed, and where the authority of the Prime Minister is clearly weak, you don't solve that by a speech in which nothing goes terribly wrong. And a week from now, what will be more important, the speech or the continuing dissension within the governing party?
Yeah, I mean, but the dissension as well is a little bit very much what the Tories do, isn't it? I mean, there's constantly kind of backbiting going on, backstabbing going on, plots being hatched all over the place. But in the end, they don't want to lose their jobs. And if they were to have an election or to force an election at this point, then that's probably what would happen.
Oh, completely, yeah. No one in the Tory party with any sense would want that. But on the other hand, as was shown over the past couple of days, and indeed it was shown in many people would say during the overthrow of Al Johnson, the party was unable to restrain itself from self-harm, even though anybody could have told them that having sacking your leader and having a leadership contest at this stage was very damaging to their election prospects. I don't know what's going through their minds. In fact, I haven't known since the assassination of Johnson what on earth they thought they were doing. I'm not a Tory, so it's not my problem. I remember when I did try to engage with the Conservative Party many years ago, watching dear old Ian Duncan Smith trying frantically to make impressive speeches at Tory party conferences, willing him on to do so, but feeling as I willed him on that it wasn't working.
Well, I mean, famously, the quiet man is turning up the volume was one of the most cringeworthy speeches I think ever made, wasn't it?
If he'd stopped at that point, it would have been okay, but he then went on and on at a higher volume for about another half hour of
No, I mean, extraordinary stuff. We're going to keep you over past the news because I want to talk to you, obviously, about the cannabis debate that's been going on over the last couple of days. But you wrote a piece at the weekend about what the Tories should do to win the next election. Yeah. Are you still of that opinion as to what you wrote then, or have you changed anything?
Well, I said that this is what they should do, but what they won't do. They're not capable of it. There isn't. You could not find, if you search through the whole roster of Tory members of Parliament, let alone front benches, people who understood these basic points anymore. Most people who come into the Tory party these days come in through a ladder of ambition, thinking it's a career, and have very little in the way of politics, and certainly aren't conservatives by nature. That's the whole problem. The Tory party, really, since 1945, has spent its entire time adapting itself to what the Labour Party wants it to think, so that every time it comes back to power after a Labour government, it doesn't undo what Labour does, and it hasn't. And if you don't confront your opponents ideologically, then you will become your opponents. And you have a whole load of people who are basically not easy to distinguish from either Labour or the Liberal Democrats. They can all go into coalition with each other without any real problem. And how would you expect them to pursue really tough conservative ideas of the kind I set out? I don't think you could.
No, I don't think you could either. I mean, a couple of people have picked up on what she said about Ukraine as well. There was a standing ovation when she said that Ukraine must win, Ukraine will win. That's not quite in keeping with what you think should be happening either.
Well, I tend to think that it's better for people not to be killed and driven from their homes and turned into refugees. If you can possibly obtain peace, it's better to do that. And I don't think that making bombastic speeches about total victory necessarily works. I mean, we certainly have undoubtedly discovered what I've been saying for years, which is that the Russian armed forces aren't actually up to much. But I'm not sure that means that they can actually be driven bag and baggage out of Ukraine by a military force. And if you really want to bring this to an end without too many more deaths and too many more people turned into refugees, I think there should be a serious effort towards peace. There has been no war in modern history in which so little effort has been made to obtain peace. And people have to think about that and wonder why it is. I have my own theories. But everything that I say is done, in my view, in the interests of my own country. I'm a British patriot. I don't know quite exactly what good our involvement in this conflict does to Britain, or indeed to the world as a whole. So I'm sceptical about it, for which I get called a traitor and all kinds of other stuff.
Yes, quite. And as far as the Labour Party is concerned, I mean, you made reference to Tony Blair this weekend and what he did to the country and for the country, if you like. But I mean, the Labour Party don't really have to do much at the moment, do they?
Oh, they have. People mustn't underestimate them. And Keir Starmer is even more of an ideological revolutionary than Blair was. And you can still shock people by pointing out that Blair has now confessed that he was a university Trotskyist, or that about a quarter of his cabinet were known former Marxists. I'm not sure about the former. So not particularly surprising that was a revolutionary government. But it was a very wide-ranging revolution. Constitutional change, the breakup of the Union, the destruction of the old House of Lords, attacks on civil service neutrality on an amazing scale, plus vastly expensive expenditures by Gordon Brown on Labour's favourite spending targets, and a huge in the amount of taxation. When they went, the Tories didn't really do much to reverse any of that. And now you have Keir Starmer coming on. I think he will be compelled by his party, and indeed by the electoral circumstances, into major constitutional reform. And he is himself a red-green revolutionary. And though, quite honestly, here's the problem. You just heard Miss Truss committing herself to net zero, which is perhaps the most unconservative anti-growth policy you could possibly come up with. And therefore isn't significantly different from Sir Keir Starmer on that. But he will certainly pursue all that stuff. And I don't think that Labour could be trusted to tax the country any less than the Tories will, put it like that.
Yeah.
So big changes will come if Starmer wins the election, and people shouldn't doubt it. In fact, it's probably the only reason anyone might conceivably vote Conservative, is that actually on this occasion, after about 20 years when it really wouldn't have made any substantial difference, actually a Labour government would be measurably worse than a Tory one, even despite the fact that it's so useless.
No, I think so. I think it's absolutely right. Liz Truss has just made her first speech to Tory party conference as Prime Minister. It's gone down pretty well, apart from with M people, who, of course, were the people who wrote Moving On Up. They've got somebody called Michael Pickering on Twitter, who's part of the band, saying that no permission was given for that. We are very angry. Apparently, Heather Small, who's the lead singer, has got a son, James Small Edwards, who's a Labour councillor for Westminster. So they're not too pleased about it, but apparently there's nothing they can actually do. What I can't do for you, though, is identify the guitar music that she walked off the stage to. Someone's suggesting it might have been Black Sabbath because she was in Birmingham, but I don't know. It didn't sound like them. Didn't sound like Tony Iommi. But if you know what the piece of music was, by all means do let us know. But maybe that's why they didn't play Moving On Up as the outro, on the grounds that they weren't very happy about it. We're talking to Peter Hitchens, though. First of all, columnist for the Mail on Sunday, of course. We've had his take on what Liz Truss did and what she said and what the Tories should now do, but he doesn't think they will do in order to win the next election. But let's talk now, Peter, if we may, about cannabis, because you've long been a campaigner for not only the illegalisation of cannabis rather than the legalisation of it, but you've been involved in quite a few conversations in the last few days since this suggestion that it should become a Class A drug. I mean, given that the Class A drugs currently aren't really very well policed, it doesn't seem like a great idea, does it?
No, it's a symbolic gesture. The problem with marijuana is not the class in which it's placed, but the actual enforcement of the law by the police. And for many years now, the police have decided unilaterally they will decriminalise marijuana. It was a long, slow process until about 15 years ago when it accelerated. Now, it's pretty evident to anybody living in any major British city that the police will do nothing about possession of this drug, even though it is technically a Class B drug, and you can get 5 years in prison for simple possession plus an unlimited fine, which are quite serious penalties if anybody ever applied them, but they don't. The real problem with it, and you could look all over Western Europe and large parts of North America as well, the real problem with marijuana has not been the state of the law, though this is now coming about. It is being made legal in many jurisdictions, but the fact that the existing law was not enforced. The original trick of the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act was to give it a separate status from the bogeyman drugs, which were at the time heroin and LSD, by making it Class B and making them Class A. And that was an amazing public relations triumph for the marijuana lobby, big dope as I call them, because they could then maintain and have done ever since that marijuana is what they call a soft drug, when it's not. And we increasingly see the undoubted correlation between marijuana use and quite serious mental illness, which strongly suggests an actual connection between the two. In fact, the leading psychiatrist, Professor Sir Robin Murray, is absolutely convinced that this is the case. But what can one do? The power and money of the billionaires behind the lobby to legalise this drug is huge, and many politicians accept it because they see an opportunity to raise a lot of tax. Sin taxes, as they call them, are the most reliable sources of taxation, and it's been falling off a bit in alcohol and tobacco, so they need something else to tax. So there are a lot of people with a very hard, cynical interest in legalising a drug which is in fact deeply damaging to many of its users, and this is what we now see. But this is just gesture politics, talking about Class A. What you have to do is to say to the police, enforce this law, but of course the police are not interested in enforcing laws. They're only interested in reacting to a certain number of offences afterwards. It's like this astonishing announcement today that the police are actually going to turn up at the scene of every burglary. Well, forgive me if I have some doubts about that, or maybe they'll say, well, can we make an appointment?
Yes. Well, it's a remarkable change, isn't it?
25 do. But what does it matter? The police can't un-burgle you once you've been burgled.
Yeah, and also it's a pretty hopeless situation, is it? It's a pretty hopeless situation, Peter, if the news department of the police say that it's now news that they can actually go and investigate burglaries, which previously they've more or less given up doing, haven't they?
Yeah, so the real front page news in every newspaper would be police disapprove of crime shock. I don't think they do. They're not bothered. But as I've said for some time, the police, as now called, are a failed nationalised industry, which simply does not do what it is supposed to do, and we need to build a replacement for it. And when that replacement is in working order, we can close down the existing failed operation. It's the only possible way of going back to a position where law is enforced and crime is deterred, because at the moment we don't do that. And this is very prevalent in drugs. The problem with drugs, of course, is that there is also strong evidence from certain subsets of crime that there is a connection between serious criminal violence and the use of marijuana. So if you actually policed the use of marijuana more effectively, you would almost certainly reduce violent crime as well. But this is another unsayable thing, which the pro-marijuana establishment will fall down on.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, I mean, what the pro-marijuana establishment do an awful lot of is to make comparisons to alcohol, don't they? And say, well, if you took the same number of people who drink alcohol and look at the numbers of violent crimes that are committed by them, it wouldn't really be any different. But I was interested this time in hearing, because I've always wanted to know from the US experience what exactly is going on since the legalisation of marijuana in most states. And apparently there's already signs that there's a big uptick in, as you say, psychotic behaviour by many people. There's a big uptick in hospitalisation and lung cancer as well. And also, more interestingly, there's an awful lot of car crashes in states where marijuana is legal because people are stoned and driving cars.
Yes, this is something that's beginning to make itself felt in this country as well. I heard recently of a horrible car accident in which one of those involved was detained afterwards on suspicion of having excess drugs in his bloodstream, and I don't think this is particularly uncommon now. One of the problems with this is that you don't expect immediate great spikes in increases in crime and mental illness after legalization, because almost invariably legalization of marijuana follows a long period of failed enforcement by the police. So it isn't just a sudden realization by everybody at midnight that they can now actually go out and buy dope. The other thing that you have to bear in mind is that the great claim made, and still made amazingly by the marijuana legalizers, is that if you legalize it, you will get rid of criminal involvement in drugs. Absolutely established in the state of Colorado and indeed in Canada is that legalization has actually not achieved this at all. Because the legal product is taxed and attempts are made to regulate it, the criminal black market continues to flourish on a very large scale. It simply was not true. And I pointed this out at the time and said, if you legalize it, you won't get rid of criminal connection. But now we have actual proof in operation that this is so. And yet, the campaigners, they're so dishonest. They still, if you've got one of them on your program, this would still be one of their arguments, that if you legalize it, you break the connection between criminals and drugs. It's not true.
No. And also, the other thing that's happened in Mexico, for example, is where there was quite a big sort of trafficking, cartel that sold marijuana over the border into California. They've stopped doing that, but what they're doing instead is manufacturing artificial opiates, which they're now selling into the United States of America, which are actually more dangerous. So they're still running drugs. They're just running different drugs.
Yes, it's the good old law of unintended consequences. But people will also say, oh, well, you can't control this. Everybody's failed. It's like American alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, which it isn't, by the way, because amongst many other things, American alcohol prohibition in the 1920s did not ban the possession or use of alcohol, only the sale and trafficking of it, and therefore it couldn't have the same effect as a ban on possession of marijuana. But the other thing about this claim is that in Japan and South Korea, civilized, law-governed, free countries, the police still enforce serious laws against marijuana possession, and use of both of those drugs is both much more disapproved of than it is here still, and also much rarer. And that's a result of the law being enforced. People make sort of various racialist remarks suggesting this is some kind of cultural difference between us and the Japanese and South Koreans. It's not. They've simply decided that they're going to stand up against the drug propaganda and do something about it, and it works. And they never, ever accept this. They always try and distract attention from the fact that laws against possession of drugs, if enforced, work. They worked in this country, too, before the end of the 1960s quite effectively.
Interesting. Well, Peter, this is great to talk to you. We were slightly on a different day. We'll see you next Monday, hopefully, back to normal.